All right, thanks everybody for joining us. Welcome to our third installment of our energy speaker series. We're going to be talking about energy storage today. I want to just start with a land acknowledgement. I am working from my home here in Anchorage, which is on the traditional and current lands of the Dena'ina people. The REAP staff works around the state, and we're all working from our respective homes, which are on the current lands and territories of the Dena'ina, the Ahtna, and the Tlingit. We acknowledge the thousands of years of stewardship that these lands and waters and life of the indigenous knowledge and ways of life that continue to guide us today. I'd like to invite everybody to use the chat function in the webinar to say where you're coming from today. If you know the native land that you're on, that's great. If not, no worries. If you want to look up your native lands, you can use the link that is listed above the map here on this slide, native-land.ca, and you can zoom in and find out which native land you are. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat feature. You can click that and just go ahead and let us know where you're coming from. While people are doing that, I'm gonna just take care of a few housekeeping items. First, when you're using the chat, I think it automatically just sends it to just the panelists. So if you go ahead and select all panelists and attendees, then everybody will be able to see what you're saying. Another feature we're gonna be using is the question and answer button also at the bottom of your screen. So we've got some great presentations lined up today, and we're going to leave some room at the end for questions, but we want to encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. So as things pop up and you're curious, just use the Q&A feature, not the chat feature at the bottom. That'll help us keep track of all the questions and make sure stuff gets answered, and some of it might be answered live by the panelists, and then we'll save a few for the end, hopefully. So Q&A button at the bottom for your questions. We're also recording this webinar. We'll be putting it up on YouTube when we're done, and we'll use the audio and release the audio in a podcast format. So we'll be sure to send links out to everybody after where those things are going to be posted. So if you want to share with friends or watch it again, you'll be able to do so. And the last housekeeping item is just to announce our final speaker series event of the season coming up 2 weeks from today, Wednesday, November 18th. We'll be back at 12 p.m. instead of 11, and we'll be talking about the power cost equalization program. So there'll be a little bit of background on the creation of PCE, and then we're going to have a robust discussion on the current state of the program and what is at stake in the legislative session this year. So if you're interested in learning more about rural energy costs and PCE, definitely worth tuning into that event. We'll have AVEX Mira Kohler and REAP's Chris Rose leading that discussion with a couple other experts. So that's the kind of business end of the webinar today. And then I'm going to do just a quick REAP intro, and then I'll intro our speakers, and we'll jump into things here soon. So yeah, oh, and I want to see if people are kind of chatting it up. Yeah, looks like lots of good chatting on where everyone's from. So thanks everyone for doing that. So yeah, REAP is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We were founded in 2004. And broadly speaking, we are working to advance the use of clean energy in Alaska. And clean energy is defined as renewable energy and energy efficiency. And energy storage, the topic today, is definitely a part of that picture. We usually talk about our work in these 4 pillars: technology, funding, policy, and people. Technology is the one area that we don't work in directly. We don't have engineers on our staff, but we work adjacent to the technology that's going on, and we work hard to interpret technology that's happening and how it applies to the other areas of our work. So battery storage is an example of technology that we're not doing direct work in, but this event is part of that effort in sort of translating, so to speak, what's going on in that realm. Um, so then our work falls in these other three pillars, and I'll just kind of mention a few initiatives that are at the top of our list these days. On the funding front, we've been working hard on establishing a green bank in Alaska. There's been some good progress on that, and we're hopeful to have a green bank set up that will be funding clean energy projects around the state here in short order. On the policy front, our primary focus right now is working on a voluntary effort to establish an electric reliability organization for the Railbelt electric grid. This is something we've been working on for quite some time, and there's a lot of action right now happening in that realm, and we believe a well set up electric reliability organization will bring a lot of efficiencies to our largest electric grid in the state, and will ultimately allow for more grid scale renewables to be available for consumers. And lastly, but not least, most of our staff is working in the people pillar. Half of our staff is focused on K through 12 STEM education, and that usually happens in the form of classroom visits, and they also do teacher trainings to teach STEM education through the lens of clean energy. And then we also have a handful of collaborative efforts. I'll just mention a couple. One is the Alaska Network for Energy Education and Employment, which focuses on workforce development. And then another one is the Sustainable Southeast Partnership, focusing on Southeast Alaska and working with a lot of great people on kind of a holistic community scale framework. So if you want to learn more about any of the things I just mentioned, or get a full list of our initiatives, please head on over to our website, realaska.org, and we've got a full list there. So yeah, I'm gonna just do a little intro for our speakers. I'm really excited about today's event. This is something that I was trying to plan for last spring, and before we got shut down due to COVID. So I'm really excited that it's getting pulled together here, and you know, this format now has allowed us to bring in someone from Germany to join us. So we're lucky in that sense that we're online here. Yeah, I'll just intro our speakers and then jump right into things, because I think there's a lot of good stuff coming our way in the next hour here. So Frances Ball is going to be our first speaker. Frances is the Operations and Outreach Director for Launch Alaska, where she works to build the innovation ecosystem in Alaska by accelerating opportunities for food, water, energy, transportation startups from around the world. Frances manages all business operations and processes with a focus on impact assessment internally with Launch Alaska and their portfolio companies. And then in 2018, Frances was awarded the German Chancellor's Fellowship through the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, where she spent 1 year researching the technical and political implications of seasonal energy storage in Germany for application in Alaska and the Arctic. Prior to joining Launch Alaska, Frances was a member of the campus design team at Google, where she helped design their new headquarters in California, and with an eye on innovation and efficiency. And Frances holds a BS in Atmosphere and Energy Engineering from Stanford University. So welcome, Frances, and thanks for being here. And then following Frances, we're going to hear from Kai-Philipp Kairies. He is Director of Technical Consulting, where he supervises project development across all research sections of the Chair of Electrochemical Energy Conversion and Storage Systems at RWTH Aiken University. Kai-Philipp shares his expert knowledge on storage systems to several governmental and intergovernmental organizations, including the International Renewable Energy Agency, the German Ministry of Economics and Energy, the German Federal Network Agency, the German Federal Environmental Agency, and the Mexican National Institute for Electricity and Clean Energy. Kai-Philipp is currently operating a startup organization, company that is doing battery diagnosis, monitoring, and data analysis. And I think we'll hear some more about that. So yeah, thank you, Kai-Philipp, for joining us from Germany. And with that, I think I'll just turn it over to Frances and jump into the presentations.
Great, thanks so much, Greg. And thank you to REAP for hosting us today. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, perfect. So I see many familiar names in the attendee list, and I'm excited to connect with those of you who I don't know yet. I was surprised actually to see a lot of people calling in from Germany. So that's great too. Welcome, and it's exciting to see some more German-Alaska connections happening. So I'll take the first half of our time today, and then I'll pass it to Kai-Philipp to talk about battery storage. So I'll start with a bit of background as to how I ended up spending a year in Germany, and then I'll go into some energy facts to sort of set the scene about Germany and Alaska, and then I'll go into some of my results and recommendations for Alaska. And it's a very short amount of time today, so I'll try to get through it all. But I'm looking forward to your questions and comments as well. So I'm originally from Berkeley, California, but I've lived in Alaska the last few years. And living in Alaska, I experienced the Alaskan summers where the sun hardly sets for a few months, and there's almost constant sunlight. So this huge energy source made me think about if there was only a way to capture that summer sunlight and use it in the winter, then we wouldn't need any fossil fuel energy in Alaska or anywhere in the Arctic. So this challenge of seasonal storage, so storing energy from the summer to be used in the winter, is what is really exciting to me about the potential for energy storage in this state. And so back in 2017, I learned about the German Chancellor Fellowship from someone many of you know, Piper Foster-Wilder. She's the founder and CEO of 60 Hertz Microgrids, and also a German Chancellor Fellow. So she convinced me to apply for the opportunity to spend a year in Germany pursuing an independent research project. So as Greg mentioned, the fellowship is awarded through the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, and they select 50 fellows each year from US, Russia, China, India, and Brazil. And then we each work with a host organization throughout the year. So I worked with the Hochschule Anhalt, which is an applied sciences research university just outside Berlin. And as you can see in this picture, we got to meet Angela Merkel because the funding is through her office. So that was definitely a highlight of the program. And Greg kind of went through my background, so I'll just skip over most of this. But for those of you who aren't familiar, as Greg mentioned, I'm working with Launch Alaska, and we're a deployment accelerator focused on climate tech. So we work with energy, food, water, and transportation companies to deploy their technology here in Alaska. So first, I wanted to paint the picture of what energy looks like in Germany and Alaska. So just go through some facts to give a bit of background. So I'll go through total energy production and electricity generation, and then energy consumption, storage, and cost. So a few quick facts to start us off. Germany is the largest consumer of primary energy in Europe and the 7th highest globally. And Germany is the 6th highest emitter of CO2 globally. Coal is Germany's most abundant natural resource, but Germany relies on foreign imports for 65% of its energy consumption. Germany has begun a long-term energy transformation known as Energiewende to transition to a lower carbon coal and nuclear-free energy mix. And this includes reducing GHG emissions by 80 to 95% by 2050, phasing out nuclear by 2022, and phasing out coal by 2038. Germany introduced the Renewable Energy Act, or EEG, in 2000, guaranteeing all renewable power producers an above market fixed price for 20 years, as well as grid priority for renewables. And this was a big factor in Germany's early renewable energy success, and one of the main reasons why we all think of Germany as leading in solar. It was a lot as a result of this policy. So a few facts to compare. And Greg, if you have that poll, it's coming up here. So Germany and Alaska have approximately the same number of direct sun hours per year. And this is important because most people think of Alaska as dark all the time, and that we can't do solar, but solar is absolutely possible in Alaska. So now for the first poll, really, Greg, I didn't check with you, so if you don't have it, no worries. Oh, perfect. So how much energy does an average German household use compared to its US equivalent? I'll give you guys a few seconds to answer that. So do you think it's about a third more energy, about the same, half the energy, a third of the energy? Okay, so most of you thought it was about half the energy of its US equivalent. Actually, it is 1/3 of the energy. So the average, let's see, the average German household uses less than a third of the energy of its US equivalent. So 2 more polls coming up. The next one, you can put that up, Greg. So how has household energy consumption in the US changed in the last 20 years? And the first poll will be US, and then the next one will be Germany. So in the US, do you think energy has increased by more 20% or more, increased a little bit, stayed the same, decreased a little bit, or decreased 20% or more? So this is over the last 20 years, average household energy consumption in the US. Give you just a couple more seconds. Okay, so most people think increased 20% or more. I'm gonna save the answer on that one until we do the next one. So Greg, you can pop up the next one. So this one is for Germany. So what do you think for Germany? For the US, you said increased 20% or more. For Germany, do you think it's about the same, increased a little, decreased? Give you a couple more seconds. Okay, so most of you think in Germany it decreased about 10% or 20% or more. So you guys are on the right track. In the past 20 years, German households have reduced their energy consumption by 10%, while similar households in the US increased their energy consumption by 20%. And this is something I noticed right away just in the mindset and practices around energy savings in Germany. I could talk about this alone for 20 minutes, but I'll just give a couple examples. So in Germany, and honestly most of the world, people don't use, like one example is people don't use clothes dryers like we do in the US, they just have washers and hang dry their clothes. Another one is appliances are just smaller in general, like the homes are smaller, the appliances are smaller. One thing that caught me a little by surprise was that they don't use ice like we do. It's hard to find at any grocery stores. They don't have those huge ice freezers, and at home, most people don't have ice makers. It's also kind of hard to find at restaurants even. So that just kind of, goes to show that they have a different mindset around energy use in Germany. And that was really apparent when I was there. Okay, time for another poll. Which country do you think has more smart meters? Give Greg a second to pop that one up. So these smart meters, again, are meters that communicate directly to the electricity supplier, so people don't have to come read your meter. Greg, do you have that one?
I actually don't have that one.
Oh, no worries. That's okay. You can just, if people want to put in the chat, do you think Germany has more smart meters or the US, or do you think it's about the same? Oh, and I love that someone from Munich says she's currently line drying her laundry. Okay, everyone thinks Germany has more. Oh, one person says US. Yeah, so this one is really interesting. I also thought that Germany had more, but actually most of Germany does not have smart meters. So someone comes to read your meter a few times per year, and then you pay. So in the US, almost half of the US has smart meters, and here in Alaska, it's majority smart meters. And so everywhere I've lived in California and here, I've always had smart meters. So this was a new thing for me. And I was shocked when my landlord told me he had to hold on to my security deposit until the end of the year when he could look at the energy bill and make sure I hadn't used too much. So that was kind of a shock to me. But although Germany is behind right now, Kai-Philipp mentioned that Germans are concerned about data ownership, which is a big part of it. But I do think with the trend towards digitalization, this will likely change in Germany. So moving to energy production. In Alaska, we primarily produce oil. We don't use the vast majority of this, though. We export it. And we also produce a lot of natural gas. There on the left side. In Germany, the main energy sources for production are coal and renewables. The energy produced in Germany is almost half renewable, which is huge, but there are imports and exports, so this is not what's actually consumed. In Alaska, our electricity mix is 28% renewable if you include hydro, which is often separated out because of the negative environmental impacts of large hydro. And this was also new to me because in Europe, they almost always include hydro as part of renewables. And we still have 8.5% coal, and a year ago in October here, the only coal-fired power plant built in the US since 2015 was completed in Fairbanks, so still very much part of our electricity generation here. In Germany, they generate 35% renewable electricity, but also 35% coal, and renewables are majority wind, then solar, biomass, and some hydro. Germany has 12% nuclear still, but in the next 20 years, if Germany reaches its goals of phasing out nuclear and eliminating coal, the electricity production will look very different. The vast majority of Alaska's energy use comes from natural gas, and second highest is jet fuel. It makes sense because 70% of our energy goes towards space heating. So that's the main use of energy here. And this is mostly natural gas in Anchorage, at least. And for jet fuel, it makes sense because we have more personal planes per capita than anywhere else in the world. Mineral oils, the highest for Germany. This was kind of a shock for me as well when we look at total energy consumption. And this is really because Germans drive a lot and really like their cars. I found that to be true when I was there, and a lot of this is going towards transportation. Natural gas is second highest. It's also the main source of heating for Germany, so this makes sense. And when you look at total energy consumption in this figure here, you can see it's about 14% renewable. And this isn't super high, but this is the figure that I think matters the most because it takes into account total energy consumption. So when you compare Germany to the rest of Europe, they rank 20th out of 30 countries for share of renewables in gross final energy consumption. So what does storage look like in Alaska? I won't spend too much time on this, but we have, and again, this is difficult to measure. So these numbers are changing pretty quickly, but we have about 61 megawatts of total installed projects, and this is the rated power. So it doesn't help determine the amount of time the storage is used for, but most of these projects here are only supposed to provide storage for a few minutes for grid balancing. Back in 2003, a huge battery project was installed in Fairbanks, mostly for backup power to prevent blackouts. And this was very early for batteries, so Alaska got into the storage market quite early. There's several innovative projects in rural Alaska. One of them I think is pretty interesting is the wind diesel thermal storage. So storing heat in bricks and using them to heat homes. One exciting project that's in construction right now is the battery energy storage system in Homer. And this will be a huge installation and is just one example of many projects in the works in the state. So in Germany, they have about 1,000 times more storage than in Alaska. And you might be thinking, well, of course, they're much bigger, they have way more people. But if you do it per capita, they still have about 10 times more storage than Alaska. Germany has several different technologies in place. Pumped hydro has been the biggest for a long time. It's a very old technology, but going forward, there aren't as many opportunities for it. Batteries are taking off rapidly, you can see in the graph, and Kai-Philipp will get a bit more into that. Small and commercial battery systems, thermal, and power to gas. And the last two are the ones I focused a bit more of my time looking into, and are receiving a lot of funding and research right now in Germany. Let's see, Greg, did you have this poll about the residential price of electricity?
Yeah.
I can skip through it.
Okay,
Okay, great. So the first one is the residential price of electricity higher in Germany or Alaska? What do you think? Okay, you can close that one down, Greg. Germany. So let me just jump to that. So you guys guessed that one right. The residential price is higher in Germany. We'll get into why in a second. So the next poll, what do you think about the commercial price? So is the commercial price of electricity higher in Germany or Alaska? Give you a couple seconds to answer that one. Okay, can close that one down. So most people thought Alaska, but pretty close there. So it is closer actually, but it is a bit higher in Alaska. So this was really interesting to me. In Germany, there's a much bigger difference between commercial rates and residential rates. So the commercial rate is about half the residential rate. And in Alaska, it's about 90% of residential rate. This is pretty similar throughout the US. And I didn't specifically call out industry as part of commercial, but in Germany, it goes all the way down to like 5 cents in some cases. And this was new to me. And kind of the reason I found was in Germany, there's several countries all, next to each other. And so industry could just move to another country if someone else wanted to give a lower rate. So there's a lot of competition. Whereas in the US, we don't have that situation. And so a lot of industry, it would be harder to just jump to another country. Of course, there are many other reasons, but that's one of them. Another big difference is that in Europe, they pay a lot more taxes and fees than we do. The cost of electricity is about 50% taxes and fees. And in the US, it varies, but could be between, closer to 10% of the bill rather than 50%. So this was pretty surprising to me and just kind of explains the cost a little bit better. So that was a bit of an overview about, the energy systems in Alaska and Germany. And now I will switch gears and finally, just in the last couple of minutes here, tell you about kind of what I learned and what I spent my time looking into. So this is kind of, my science research talk, but simplifying this a little bit. Basically, I spent my time there learning about the market for energy storage and where it's heading. And kind of focusing on that long-term goal of figuring out how to capture summer sunlight and use it in the winter, which meant that I had to focus on alternatives to batteries. So why not batteries? Batteries typically can't store energy for more than a few hours, so a few weeks or months is out of the question. That was the main reason why I chose to focus on alternatives that could be used for seasonal storage. But just wanted to point out that there are other negative impacts as well for batteries, such as they're difficult to recycle and reuse, limited availability of materials, and they have a resource-intensive fabrication process. So what did I learn while I was there? First, there is a viable market for alternatives that already exist today. These aren't just pilot or demonstration projects. Utilities are choosing technologies such as thermal storage actually for economic reasons, which was really cool to see. The biggest challenge, though, that I heard again and again is that storage is that there are significant regulatory barriers. So storage hasn't been defined in policy, and providers are taxed as consumers and producers, as they consume energy from the grid and then sell it back onto the grid. So that makes it really difficult to make any money. So the main takeaway there was that we need to change policy so that they can be classified as their own entity, separate from consumers and producers. And in the US, several states do have regulation around storage, but it's still a problem here as well. Even though there is a market and it is getting a lot of press and funding and growth, batteries are still leading the way. And I believe that advanced batteries will be the most promising storage technology worldwide. And by that, I mean ones that are easier to recycle and don't contain materials that are causing negative environmental or social impacts. And this huge increase in batteries in the last 10 years also has made way for new companies in battery recycling, logistics, and testing, which Kai-Philipp will get into in more detail, as he started his own company in that space. And so where's this market heading? What are the trends? What's next? So Germany is one of the top 5 leading storage markets worldwide. The energy storage market is growing, and electrification and sector coupling are 2 of the biggest trends contributing to that growth. And sector coupling refers to integrating the electricity sector with the energy sector, so including heat, mobility, and industry. And we need storage in order to sector couple and to electrify the energy sector. Germany will need to incorporate thermal storage and hydrogen for seasonal storage as they get kind of closer to higher and higher percentage of renewables on the grid. There's also a shift towards decentralized storage, which was pretty interesting to learn just about virtual utilities and how Germany is seeing this happen kind of more quickly than the US, and utilities are starting to lose customers as people manage their own storage and trade amongst each other. So just to wrap this up, how can this knowledge about Germany be applied to Alaska? So I found that hydrogen and district thermal are the most promising for seasonal storage in Alaska. Hydrogen could be produced with wind and solar that we have here and stored in tanks for use in the winter. District thermal could help take advantage of waste heat or excess renewables to heat homes, and in the right areas, it could even use geothermal. So one thing I didn't mention was I spent a month in Iceland as part of my year in Europe, and so I learned a lot about geothermal. And I know we also have geothermal in Alaska. It's not linked with population centers. So one of my takeaways is that we should be pairing geothermal with industry, similar to how they do that in Iceland, with either food production or industries from out of state coming to take advantage of the renewable resource. Again, sector coupling to improve the entire energy system here. It doesn't make sense to just talk about electricity here when most of our energy is used towards heating. Also, we need storage here to increase renewable penetration because we're islanded. So in Germany, they have other countries nearby where they can kind of trade and use that as essentially like a storage bank. But for us, we're separate from the rest of the US and just, haven't traded with Canada in this way. And so it's essential if we want to increase renewable energy to use more storage. So those are just a few of my recommendations for Alaska. I know I whizzed through that super quickly, so I'm excited for more questions and talking with you all, one-on-one after this. Here are a few fun photos from my year in Germany, but I wanted to pass it over to Kai-Philipp, and I got to interview him when I was in Germany and visit the university he used to work at in Aachen for a few days and tour the battery facility there. And we just had a great time. So I was really excited when he agreed to join me here today and share kind of the other side of storage with focus on batteries. So I will stop sharing my screen now and let you take it away, Kai-Philipp. Let's see, stop share. There you go.
Awesome, thank you. So let me try to get this working. So you should be able to see my screen now.
Yep, we can.
Awesome. So I'm working from a laptop screen here, so I can't see the chat. But Greg, maybe if you want to take the lead, if there's any, questions coming up where you think that, a quick answer would be great, just could you do that and just ask them for me, because I don't want to keep up the window all the time, because then you couldn't see my slides anymore.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. Yeah, so again, thank you for inviting me to this event. I'm going to skip over this part and get right into, well, basically I would say the market development of battery storage systems in Germany and how they enable clean energy in a highly, interconnected and industrialized country, and what learnings we made there and what's maybe applicable to other energy systems in the world. So, starting from the very beginning, why are we talking about battery storage or energy storage in general? If we want to move towards a sustainable energy future that is mostly relying on solar and wind power, we will need additional flexibilities to ingest these volatile energy sources into our grid and match generation and demand. And there are basically two sources of flexibility that we can tap into. The first one is power grids. And power grids offer spatial flexibility. So you generate at one point, at one geographic location, and then you use a power grid to bring the energy to a different point where you use it. I know this might sound stupid, but it's super important down the line when we think about how, battery storage systems and grids can work with each other. So power grids, spatial flexibility. Storage systems, temporal flexibility. You generate electricity at one point, you keep it there, you save it for later, and then you use it afterwards. So with the grid, you have to have generation and load at the same time, but at different spaces. And with the storage system, you still you need generation and load on the same site, but at different times. And there's two kinds of storage systems, battery storage systems, that I would like to say a few words about. One thing is residential home storage systems, where Germany is probably the number one leading country in the world in terms of this technology development, and the other one is grid scale battery storage. So in a nutshell, what a residential home storage battery does is it charges during the day when the sun is shining, the PV modules are producing electricity, but no one's at home. So usually you would feed that energy into the grid, but with a home battery, you're charging the battery, and then when you come home in the evening and start cooking or using the lights and whatever, you discharge the battery to power your household. And with this, we can in summer reach self-sufficiency rates in Germany of more than 90 to 95%, because the German summer is quite good, and so we can produce a lot of energy. And if the battery is sufficiently sized, you can almost power the entire household for a couple of months. But in the winter, you still need to rely on the grid. And the economic case for battery systems in households is basically by using more cheap solar electricity, you save on your electricity bill. And by that, you can pay back the investment costs for the storage system. And the market for home storage systems has been incredible over the past, 7 years now. It all started in 2012, 2013, and we actually we worked together with the Ministry of Energy in Germany to set up a funding scheme. And the interesting thing is, when we wrote the text for this law, we also sneaked in a paragraph that said all funded systems have to take part in a mandatory scientific monitoring program, and that monitoring program was conducted by us, so we have a pretty good understanding of what happened over the past 5 years. We did a lot of studies on that, so if you're interested in the details of this market development, just shoot me an email and I can supply you with the links to the sources. So fast forward to today, we are looking at anything between 220 and 250,000 battery storage systems, each with a nominal capacity in the range of 7 to 8 kilowatt hours and a power of probably in the range of 3.5 kilowatt. So this adds up to an overall power of more than 1 gigawatt, just in residential homes. And just as a comparison, 1 gigawatt is a mid-sized pumped hydro storage power plant. So this is pretty amazing for a technology that wasn't even around 7 years ago. And the market growth seems to go on and on, so we're really excited about what will happen over the next 3 to 5 years.
There is a quick question here, Kai-Philipp,
Sure.
about the time frame for earning back your investment with energy systems and home solar battery systems in Germany.
Well, if you ask the manufacturers of these systems, they will say something in the range of 10 years. We did a lot of analysis on the topic, and I would say if you're really good, you can do it in 15 years, and you still would need the battery to live for that long. So for many installations today, it will not be an economic investment, which is funny, because they are heavily advertised with save on your electricity bill. And of course it's true, you do save on your electricity bill, but you spend money on an asset. But what's also true is that the combination of a solar power plant with a storage system is still a good investment that will give you an interest rate of 3 or 4%. But if you install just the solar power plant without the storage, your return on investment will be higher. So there's a lot of, in the beginning there was a lot of early adopters, innovators that were interested in the technology. We did a lot of surveys on why did you install such a battery? And the top 3 answers were always, I want to take part, or I want to take things in my own hand. I want to do my own energy transition because I think the politics are not, acting on it in the right way. The second one always was, I'm interested in the technology. And the third one was, I want to hedge against rising electricity prices. So Germany has one of the highest electricity prices in the world, and they have been growing always over the past 10 years. So it's kind of understandable that people want to hedge against future price increases. But still, I would say that many of these systems realistically will have a zero margin, or will maybe pay back over 15 years, but not generate significant revenues.
Awesome, thank you.
This is a funny one. If you follow the battery space a little bit, it seems like decades ago, but it was only 2013, 2014 when lead acid batteries were still, the majority of systems sold. Lithium-ion batteries had not been used in stationary applications in a larger sense until 6 years ago, which is crazy because today, as you can see, if you talk about a stationary battery storage systems, it's most of the times, 90%, it's lithium. And then there's, some other innovative technologies like redox flow or high temperature and such. But lead acid batteries, which, were the vast majority until a decade ago, have basically vanished from this market. So why did this happen? There's a couple of technical reasons and a couple of fields where lithium-ion batteries are just the superior technology in terms of, you know, their efficiency, that they're maintenance free, they have a longer lifetime. But I would say the most striking development we have seen is the price, and that's prices for lithium-ion batteries. And what we can see here is the retail price, including the whole system installation and all taxes. So it's really, you multiply the price on the y-axis with the number of kilowatt hours you want to buy, and that's the number on your invoice. So we included everything. That's oftentimes, you know, you neglect taxes and such, but we put it all together to give you a real number. And so we can see that prices for lithium-ion batteries declined by more than 50% over 6 years, which is amazing, and they're still falling. So it's basically, if you think about batteries, it's the best value for the money you can get today. 2 quick slides on utility scale storage systems. So how can batteries help our transition towards sustainable energy, and how can they be used for, you know, grid services, for example. And the difficult thing about this topic is that grid services are super individual depending on where you are in the world, and they're highly regulated. So usually if you know everything about batteries in a certain market, you basically know nothing about them in a separate market that might just be 30 miles away. And this is the case for Europe. This is the case for the US. The US basically, you know, has, every state has its own electricity market and it has its own regulation. So it's incredibly difficult to give a broad overview about the potentials of batteries. But to give you like 2 or 3 examples here, I guess most of you have heard of the infamous duck curve of California, where adding solar to the electricity system will lead to almost 100% or towards 100% renewable energy during the day. But as the sun goes down, they will face a sharp problem, because the ramp down of the solar must be compensated by a ramp up of anything else. And for example, coal-fired power plants, which could be used for that, are not able to ramp up so quickly. So we need storage systems to smooth out the transition from solar to whatever comes at night. And another thing is grid frequency response. So we need quick assets to jump in if a generation plant has to shut down unexpectedly, and batteries are extremely well suited for that. They can go to nominal power output in 20 milliseconds, basically. And one interesting thing is Germany has pledged to build 450 megawatt hours of virtual transmission, which is basically a UPS system, uninterruptible power supply system for the high voltage electricity grid, which enables grid operators to avoid redundancy and use existing power lines at full capacity all the time. Quick view on the market development. We have, until last year, seen about 70 large-scale storage installations with a total capacity of about 600 something megawatt hours. And so if you add the residential home storage systems, we are looking at 2 gigawatt hours, even more, 2.5 gigawatt hours of battery storage in Germany installed today, which is a lot more than many people realize, actually. Okay, we're already running late, so I'll cut this really short. So there's lots of batteries around, apparently, and they are, not just in the stationary space, but also in e-vehicles, obviously. And I've been working as a battery scientist for the past 7 years. And if there's one thing I learned about batteries, it's that they are ridiculously complex. So on the right-hand side is a figure. We took 40 identical lithium-ion battery cells. They were produced in the same hour, same batch. And we took those batteries and we aged them. So we put them on a test bench and we cycled them under the exact same conditions, same temperature, same charge currents, same everything. And these identical cells that were used under the same identical conditions towards the end of their life have a deviation of 30%. And this is horrible. If you want to design and operate an asset for 10 or even 20 years, a 30% deviation down the line is really hard to compensate. And you really need to think of ways to deal with it if you want to have an efficient system. And the next challenge is you don't not only have to deal with the difficulties of one particular battery, but usually system integrators or car manufacturers, they have 3 or 4 different suppliers, and each of these suppliers, the batteries, are completely different. And so you end up with a huge complexity overflow. And so the company that we founded this year, it's called ACCURE Battery Intelligence. And what we're basically doing is we're supporting companies in understanding and optimizing their batteries by giving them a web platform where they can basically push all the data, battery-related data that they have, lab tests, its field data, its data sheets. If their supplier gave them anything of a model, we can use that too. We take this data, we crunch the numbers, we do a lot of data cleansing, we make it comparable across different generations, and then we basically we use battery models, electric thermal aging. And with this information, we can really help to improve battery systems, to build better systems, to operate them in a way that we can improve the lifetime by up to 20%. We can give, the valuation of a used car battery, empower second life business models, and all these things. This is like a snapshot from one of our dashboards that we built for one customer, where you can see, bottom left hand, he has 4 different generations of cells in the field, and the NMC2 seems to be aging quicker than it should. So we should, take a closer look at that. We're currently working with mostly European and Asian companies. We have about 300 megawatt hours of assets under monitoring so far. Most of it actually in the stationary storage space today, but with some really interesting projects in the e-mobility space coming up. And I think probably that we're already one of the largest independent databases on battery storage systems in the world. We have over 250,000 battery modules under management from all big suppliers across the globe. And with that, I'll thank you for your attention, and I'm open to questions.
Thanks, Kai-Philipp. That was definitely interesting, and seems like we could probably fill another hour talking about this. There are a few questions streaming in, so maybe I'll just crack away at a few here. Let's see, one coming from Susanna. Is energy storage more difficult in colder climates such as Alaska compared to Germany? Do you need to develop different batteries or technology to combat potential energy loss from the cold? And I know this question has come up in relation to electric vehicles as well, as they get more popular up here.
So generally, cold is not a big issue for batteries as long as they're not freezing. So generally, you always have an air condition for large-scale battery systems, usually to cool them because they run hot, and a hot battery dies very quickly. So a cold environment is actually not a bad thing. but there's one thing you should not do, and that's fast charge a battery when it's cold. And so, talking about electric vehicles, the manufacturers should be very mindful about the surrounding temperatures, but it's already state of the art. So no battery management system would let you fast charge a battery that is below 25 degrees Celsius.
Thanks. Another one here. Wondering where in Germany are most of the residential battery storage systems? They assume in the south. This is from Philip St. John. And if you know what brand people are using?
Yeah, good guess. So actually, if you look at a map of Germany and you put in the home storage systems, it's so clear. Like, you have lots of home storage systems where it's sunny and people are wealthy, and that's the south. And there's also a couple of storage systems in the west because it's the most densely populated area in Germany, but the south is leading by a lot. And the most popular brands is, we have a lot of home storage companies in Germany. So Sonnen is maybe known to a couple of you, that was recently acquired by Shell. We have E3DC, which is a company from Western Germany that holds about 15 to 20% market share in Europe. There's the big Asian companies like BYD and LG Chem, who have a fair market share, and a couple of smaller ones.
Thank you. And I see a couple good questions from Mark Masteller in the chat. The first one for Francis, I think this is a good one to answer live. Any thoughts on potential pumped hydro development in rural Alaska?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mark. Because we were so limited on time today, I didn't get much time to dive into pumped hydro, but I think it's a really interesting option for Alaska, and we have a lot of hydro, just not pumped hydro. I think the main barrier is that it's really expensive. These are big, capital intensive, time intensive construction projects. So I'm not sure the demand in one particular rural location would be enough. And it's just about finding the right geography too. So in Germany, they installed a lot early on, and now they don't have as many locations where it makes sense, which is why they're not doing a lot more pumped hydro. But in Alaska, we have a huge state. We have a lot of locations where we have, you need a hill with a reservoir. And so if there's the right geography for it in rural Alaska, next to a big load, I think it definitely could make sense, given some additional grant funding and other ways to kind of cover that initial cost.
Thank you. And Mark has another good question for Kai-Philipp. What's driving the price reduction for lithium-ion batteries?
Yeah, that's a very good question, very complex. So there have been a couple of developments. Well, there has been an incredible amount of developments in lithium-ion batteries. And interestingly, the reason why it all started, why did lithium-ion batteries become so powerful and so popular? They were literally invented less than 30 years ago, 1991. And the reason why lithium-ion batteries went on that, fast growth track is they were able to power your laptop or your smartphone twice as long as any technology before. At a ridiculous price point. They were 5 or 10 times more expensive than the legacy technologies. But, having a laptop that runs for 4 hours was, people would pay any amount of that back in the 90s. And so they always had this competitive advantage of high energy density, and people were willing to pay. And so there was a lot of money going into this technology. And energy density, by the way, is one of the most, important levers when you think about cost, because a higher energy density means you need less material for the same energy output. And less material is not just less metals and less graphite, it's also less production time. You can in a given day with a given speed of production, you can get out more kilowatt hours if your energy density is higher. So this is, I think, one of the most important topics, one of the most important levers on that. But also, to be honest, we have a extremely volatile market in terms of demand and supply. And so many battery factories that are built today, the demand for their output is not there yet. So they're betting on electric cars to become so, dominant that in 5 years, these factories will run on full capacity. But until then, they're producing batteries that might not, be used right away. So if you have a, overproduction, the price goes down. And I think that's part of the cost curve too.
Great, thank you. Well, we still have a handful of questions here, but we are about out of time. I think Kai-Philipp mentioned sharing his contact information, and I'm sure Francis as well would be willing to do that. I will be sending a follow-up email out to everybody in the next day or two, and I'll be sure to include that. I guess any closing thoughts from either of you before I kind of wrap things up here?
Yeah, not much. Thank you so much, Greg, and thanks for being with me here today, Kai-Philipp. So many good questions, so I look forward to connecting with everyone offline as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, so huge thanks to both you guys. Kai-Philipp, I know it's late in Germany, so we appreciate you staying up with us and sharing all this good knowledge, and a big thanks to you as well, Francis. Yeah, you were a huge help in pulling this together, and thank you everybody for joining us, and we hope you can join us next time. I'm just going to share our poster here. Oops, not that one. Yeah, so we'll be looking at PCE. There's definitely a good, we're getting to the beginning of a conversation on rural energy storage and small communities and kind of grid scale energy storage. So it's a good segue to start talking about rural energy and power cost equalization, a little bit of a different take on it, but it'll be an interesting conversation Wednesday, November 18th from 12 to 1 p.m. So I'll leave this up. There's a little URL you can sign up, and I'll send a registration link to everybody else. So yeah, again, thank you, Kai-Philipp, thank you, Francis, and thank you everybody else for joining us. And we look forward to having you next time.
Thank you.
All right. Take
Goodbye.
care. Thanks.